Morning mist clings to the fields as Rifleman Daniel Harper crouches behind a tangled earthen bank thick with roots and thorn bushes. Rainwater drips from his helmet onto the stock of his M1 rifle. Somewhere beyond the hedge, a machine gun rattles in short, disciplined bursts. Dirt sprays into the air. Birds vanish from the trees. The only sound louder than the gunfire is the pounding of his own heartbeat. Then something unexpected happens. The lieutenant leading Harper's platoon disappears. No shouted orders follow. No bugle sounds. No messenger arrives. For a brief moment, the battlefield hangs in uncertainty, the kind of silence measured in seconds but remembered for a lifetime. Watching from concealed positions nearby, experienced German defenders expect the Americans to freeze. In many armies of the era, the loss of an officer could paralyze a unit. Command structures were rigid. Decisions flowed from the top, remove the leader, and confusion often spread faster than bullets. Instead, the opposite unfolds. A sergeant motions with his hand. Two riflemen crawl left. Another squad slips through a gap in the hedgerow. A machine gun team shifts position without waiting for permission. Someone tosses smoke grenades. Another calls for supporting fire over the radio. Within moments, dozens of independent decisions merge into a coordinated assault. To the Germans observing through binoculars, it looks almost impossible. Who is actually in charge? The answer is not obvious. And that is precisely what makes the attack so dangerous. Across Europe, military planners have spent generations believing that discipline means obedience, and that obedience means waiting for orders. Yet here, under fire and amid confusion, American soldiers appear to function even when formal leadership is disrupted. Individual initiative fills the gaps before hesitation can take hold. It raises an unsettling question. If an army can keep fighting after losing its officers, where exactly is its center of gravity? German intelligence reports and battlefield recollections repeatedly note moments when American formations recover with surprising speed after casualties among leaders. The phenomenon is not universal, and every army has examples of initiative under pressure. But enough incidents occur to leave seasoned observers puzzled. They expect disorder. They encounter adaptation. The mystery deepens with every engagement. American units are not perfect. They make costly mistakes, misjudge terrain, and suffer heavy losses in the hedgerows of Normandy. Some attacks fail spectacularly. Radios malfunction. Maps prove inaccurate. Entire companies lose their bearings in fields divided by walls of earth and vegetation that block visibility in every direction. And still, many small groups continue moving. Private soldiers make choices. Corporals improvise. Sergeants reorganize shattered squads. Junior leaders who were never expected to command dozens of men suddenly do so because circumstances demand it. It seems almost chaotic. Yet the chaos produces momentum. The contradiction is striking. The United States entered the war with many citizen soldiers drawn from factories, farms, offices, and schools. They lacked the centuries-old military traditions of some European powers. By conventional assumptions, they should have depended even more heavily on centralized direction. Instead, they often display remarkable flexibility. The puzzle is not that officers matter less. They matter enormously. Effective leadership saves lives and shapes campaigns. The puzzle is why so many American units continue functioning when officers become casualties, communications break down, or plans collapse. The answer is hidden far from the hedgerows of Normandy. It begins in classrooms where recruits are encouraged to solve problems instead of merely memorize instructions. It continues on training grounds where non-commissioned officers are expected to think, not simply obey. It extends into doctrine, logistics, communications, and a culture that rewards practical initiative when conditions change faster than written plans. But none of that is visible to the German machine gun crew watching through drifting smoke. All they see is an enemy advancing from unexpected angles, as though every small unit has acquired a mind of its own. By midday, the hedgerow that seemed impregnable has been breached. The defenders fall back to another line. Survivors compare notes and ask the same question in different words. How could these men reorganize so quickly? Was it luck? Superior equipment? Different tactics? Or had the Americans quietly embraced a philosophy of leadership that distributed responsibility far beyond commissioned officers? The answer would influence not only battles in Normandy, but military thinking for generations afterward. It would challenge assumptions about authority, trust, and the role of the individual under extreme pressure. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon on the battlefield is neither a tank nor an artillery shell. Sometimes it is a soldier who believes he has permission to act. And to understand how that idea emerged, and why it left so many German soldiers genuinely surprised, you first need to understand the institutions, training, and culture that shaped the American army long before the first shots echoed across the fields of Normandy. August 1944. Normandy, France. The hedgerows were not just terrain. They were walls of earth reinforced by centuries of roots, living fortifications that turned every field into a separate battlefield. For the German army defending Normandy, this environment was ideal. It slowed armored vehicles. It broke infantry formations. It forced attackers into narrow corridors where machine guns could be pre-aimed like hunting rifles waiting for prey. And yet, something did not behave as expected. American units kept advancing, even after their leadership structure broke down under fire. In German doctrine, this was supposed to be the decisive moment. Remove officers, disrupt communication, and the attack should stall. That belief was not theoretical. It was built into training, reinforced by decades of European warfare, where command hierarchy defined battlefield survival. But Normandy did not follow that script. A captured German after-action report from the 352nd Infantry Division described American behavior as fragmented but persistent, a phrase that confused analysts. Fragmentation normally meant collapse. Persistence meant coordination. The two should not coexist. But they did. In one sector near St. Lo, an American company lost its captain within minutes of contact. Mortar fire cut through the assembly point, killing runners and damaging radios. From a German perspective, this should have ended the attack. Instead, the assault continued. Not as one unified wave, but as multiple smaller decisions happening simultaneously. To German observers, this was not command. It was something closer to distributed instinct, and it created a new problem: unpredictability. You can prepare for a coordinated enemy. You can set traps, calculate angles, and anticipate movement patterns. You cannot easily prepare for dozens of small groups making independent tactical decisions in real time. That unpredictability became the central tactical frustration for German defenders in Normandy. To understand why this shocked German soldiers, you have to understand what they expected an army to be. German military doctrine, refined through Prussian tradition and World War I experience, emphasized centralized control. Orders were precise. Subordinates executed. Initiative existed, but within strict boundaries defined by command structure. Even mission command, Auftragstactik, often misunderstood as pure decentralization, still depended heavily on trained officers and disciplined interpretation of intent. Authority mattered. Hierarchy mattered. Silence after the loss of leadership often meant hesitation, and hesitation often meant defeat. The American army, however, was not built from the same cultural foundation. By 1944, it was a mass conscript force, millions of soldiers drawn from civilian life, farmers from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, students from California. Many had never been in structured authority systems as rigid as European military institutions. But something important had already been shaping them before Normandy. Training doctrine emphasized small unit initiative. Non-commissioned officers were not treated as passive enforcers, but as decision-makers in their own right. Sergeants were expected to adapt plans when reality broke contact with command. Junior officers were taught that waiting too long for orders could be more dangerous than making a correct decision quickly. This was not chaos. It was controlled autonomy. But in combat, controlled autonomy often looks indistinguishable from improvisation. German soldiers observing the Americans could not see the months of training, the doctrinal philosophy, or the institutional design behind those rapid decisions. They only saw results, movements without visible authority, and that raised suspicion. If no officer was visible who was directing the fight, if no clear command post existed, why did coordination still emerge? The answers were not obvious on the battlefield, and so the mystery deepened. Reports from both sides began to repeat the same pattern. Question: why do American attacks continue after leadership losses? Partial answer: junior leaders take over. Bigger question: why are junior leaders prepared to take over so quickly? New discovery: they are not improvising from zero. They are acting within pre-trained decision frameworks. But even this explanation was incomplete, because there were still moments when structure seemed to vanish entirely. In several engagements, entire squads continued moving even after communication breakdowns. No radio contact, no clear orders, no visible coordination between units separated by hedgerows. And yet they converge on objectives. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but effectively enough to keep pressure on German defensive lines. This created a second mystery. Was this discipline, or something closer to shared intuition? German intelligence officers struggled to categorize it. Their reports show hesitation in language. Words like elastic, amorphous, and self-adjusting appear repeatedly. One officer wrote that American units behaved like water finding paths through resistance, an analogy that unintentionally captured the problem. Fluid systems do not require a single controlling point, but armies traditionally do. So if control was not centralized, where was it? The investigation pointed towards something uncomfortable for traditional military thinking. Authority might not be located in a single person at all. It might be distributed across multiple roles, embedded in training and activated only under pressure. But theory alone could not explain battlefield survival. Something had to be happening in real time, something visible, something that worked when structure collapsed. The answer emerged not from a general, but from patterns repeated across thousands of small engagements. The breakthrough was a non-commissioned officer system combined with decentralized tactical trust. Sergeants became the true operational backbone, not because officers were absent, but because sergeants were empowered to act immediately when conditions changed. In one engagement near the village of Formigny, an American platoon lost radio contact within minutes of entering combat. German machine guns pinned the forward element. Casualties mounted. A traditional structure would have stalled. Instead, a staff sergeant assessed the terrain, identified a blind angle in the hedgerow, and redirected two squads without waiting for higher approval. Within minutes, the flank collapsed. No grand strategy was issued. No divisional command intervened. The decision was local, immediate, functional. This pattern repeated across Normandy. The system worked not because officers disappeared, but because authority was not exclusively dependent on them. Decision-making was layered. Officers defined intendencios executed adaptation, soldiers executed action. When one layer failed, the others compensated. To German soldiers watching from defensive positions, it appeared as if American units were self-organizing under pressure. That perception was not entirely wrong, but it was not accidental either. It was designed into training, reinforced through doctrine, and tested repeatedly in combat environments where hesitation meant death. In one hedgerow sector, a German machine gun crew observed a pattern they could not fully explain. American troops would advance, pause under fire, disappear into terrain breaks, then reappear in positions that were not predictable from previous movement patterns. At first, it looked like confusion. Then it became clear it was adaptation. A corporal would identify cover. A squad would split without waiting for higher orders. A machine gun team would shift angles independently. And the attack would resume, not as a straight line, but as a shifting geometry of pressure. German defenders began reporting frustration not with enemy strength, but with enemy behavior. It was not the size of the force that mattered. It was its ability to keep reorganizing itself faster than it could be disrupted. In one intercepted conversation, a German NCO reportedly asked, "Where's their command post?" There was no clear answer, because the command post, in practical terms, was everywhere decisions were being made. What emerged in Normandy was not just a tactical difference. It was a structural difference in how organizations respond under stress. Traditional hierarchy assumes stability, but combat is not stable. It is fragmented, noisy, and constantly breaking communication chains. In such environments, Systems that depend entirely on top-down instruction degrade rapidly. Systems that distribute decision authority survive longer. The American experience in Normandy revealed a deeper principle. Leadership is not only about issuing orders. It is about designing conditions where others can safely make decisions without waiting for permission. German soldiers were not confused because Americans lacked discipline. They were puzzled because discipline no longer looked like obedience alone. It looked like distributed responsibility operating under extreme pressure. And that realization would echo far beyond World War II, into modern military doctrine, into business leadership, into any system where survival depends on decisions being made faster than centralized control can respond. Because in the end, the battlefield did not just test armies. It tested the idea of where intelligence in the system actually lives. And Normandy gave a surprising answer. It does not always sit at the top. June 19, 1944. Normandy hedgerow country. The same fields that once swallowed entire platoons in confusion are now scarred with movement. Trampled earth, broken branches, abandoned defensive positions. A German infantryman stands behind a collapsing hedgerow line, rifle lowered slightly, watching something he cannot easily categorize. The Americans are still advancing, not as a perfect formation, not as a rigid wave, but as something more fragmented, and yet more persistent than expected. What puzzles him is not their aggression. It is their continuity. Even after officers fall, even after radios fail, even after terrain destroys visibility and coordination, the pressure does not disappear. It shifts shape. It redistributes. It continues. And in that continuation lies the real question that echoed across both sides of the front. How do they keep doing that? What actually happened to the people and the system? After Normandy, many of the small unit leaders who held American formations together never became famous. They were not the names recorded in major war summaries. They were sergeants adjusting flanks under fire, corporals reorganizing squads after officers were lost, riflemen making decisions that, in other armies, would have required higher approval. Many did not survive the campaign, but their actions revealed something structural rather than individual. The system itself was doing part of the work. The American army did not rely solely on heroic improvisation. It relied on a trained expectation that decision-making would continue at the lowest viable level even when higher coordination failed. German officers noticed this after the fighting stabilized. Reports from interrogations and battlefield analysis began to shift tone. Earlier confusion gave way to reluctant recognition. American units were not collapsing when disrupted because collapse required dependency on a single control point. That dependency was weaker than expected, and so disruption had less effect. Long-term consequences. The implications did not end in Normandy. After 1944, military thinking began to evolve in subtle but lasting ways. The idea that command must always be centralized began to lose its monopoly on effective discipline. Instead, modern doctrine increasingly incorporated the principle that intent can be centralized execution, can be decentralized adaptation, must be local. What German soldiers experienced as puzzling was later studied as a system feature rather than a battlefield anomaly. The American model did not eliminate officers. It redefined their function. Officers were no longer the only source of decisions. They became architects of intent, designing objectives that others could execute independently when conditions broke down. In contrast, the battlefield of Normandy demonstrated a harsh truth. In war, communication failure is not an exception. It is a condition. Systems that cannot survive that condition do not survive long. Call to action. If the story changed the way you think about leadership, history, or how systems actually function under pressure, share it. And reflect on this. In moments where structure disappears, what guides the outcome is not always authority, but readiness at the lowest level to act correctly without waiting. If you've seen examples of that in real life, military work, or everyday situations, leave your thoughts. Because history is not only about what happened, it is about what still works when everything else stops working.